evening. Thank you so very much, Mr. President, and to the officers and members of this distinguished club, distinguished by the service to this community. I remember when I was a student at Columbia, I was trying hard to get a scholarship from the Rotary, and I'm happy to say that my wife was the recipient of the award from the foundation. I want to speak tonight and make the point that at this stage in the history of the Bahamas, I believe there is a unique opportunity for Bahamians to engage in the political process in a manner that did not exist prior to 1953. Now, what do I mean by that? I would like, as quickly as I can, to engage in a critical analysis of what we call the Quiet Revolution. The Quiet Revolution represents a nationalist movement which began in 1942 with the Burma Road riots. And we all know the colonial context of that time. We know, as a colony, the control of the mercantilist elite, of the politics, of the economy, as well as of the social institutions of our society. And our official narrative is that from 1942, with the Burma Road assault, which began a series of reforms by the British administration, leading ultimately to the enactment of the Industrial Relations Act, regulating the relationship between labor and capital within the Bahamas. We also know that the other critical date is, of course, in 1956, when for the first time the issue of race and racial discrimination was addressed in the House of Assembly, and a resolution was put forward by a number of persons, including Mr. Etienne Depuch. We also know that in 1958, we had a general strike. And these are pivotal social movements within the history of the Bahamas, which together we call, along with two other critical events. In 1961, as a result of women in this society agitating to have what any human being in any democratic society should have, and that is the right to participate in the public affairs of this country. And that suffragist movement resulted in 1961 women having the right to vote. But what I want to focus on is 1953. Because in 1953, a group of Bahamians got together and formed a political organization of which I am a member. And I want to look at what happened and what they did, and let us look back at what I call reframe this quiet revolution. In 1953, when the Progressive Liberal Party was formed, in October of that year, the party published something entitled the core values of the PLP. And it is important that we begin by looking at what did this party promise the Bahamas, the Bahamian colony at that time, 1953, October 26. The core values were published, and this is what it said. I'm summarizing them. It said that this political organization will be dedicated to the service of all Bahamians and not the privileged few. I see some of you chuckling. It says that the government should be the servant of the people and not the people the servant of the government. It said that this organization would establish and advocate for better standard of living for farmers, for fishermen, or fisher persons, civil servants, and all the working classes of this community. That this party will diversify the Bahamian economy by developing agriculture, fisheries, invigorating existing industry, and creating new industries and full employment for all. That this party would develop the family islands. And in those core values, it talks about the neglect of the family islands by the colonial administration. And that as government, this organization will exercise economic and effective administration of government. That it will pursue a strong immigration control while welcoming the outsider who can contribute to the economy of the Bahamas. That it will promote good industrial relations by protecting the workers' rights through collective bargaining and decent wage, but it recognized at the same time the right of the employer for a good day's work from the employee. And then it talked about expanding civil and political liberties. That is the franchise for women. Extend the right to vote for all. And remember, when these core values were written, to exercise the franchise, one had to own property or one had to own company. And the number of properties you own and the number of companies you own would determine how many times you could vote. It also said that all persons are born equal, that we all should have the fundamental right to work, to vote, to worship, full and equal political participation, equal protection of the law, freedom of the press, free speech, and honest political activity. It also said that it will fight for a written constitution that will give Bahamians greater control over the administration of the affairs of the Bahamas, and that it would provide equal opportunity for education, quality education, it said. These were the promises that were made in 1953. And the movements that I have referred to from 1942 culminating in majority rule in 1967 represent what Doris Johnson in her book called the Quiet Revolution. Now we all know our history. We know that this quiet revolution led to the establishment of the modern nation state of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in terms of the present institutions of our state, universal high school education for the first time, and so on. But what we do not often do is we do not critically, outside of political rhetoric, we do not critically analyze how we have fared. And I want to present to you a very interesting paper that was written by Sir Lyndon Pinley in 1998. Sir Lyndon, having been Prime Minister of this Commonwealth for 25 years, in 1998 presented a paper to the then College of the Bahamas. And the paper was entitled, Refining the Quiet Revolution. So in preparation for tonight, I went and I looked at that paper. Now this is a Prime Minister having served for up to 40 years in Parliament and 25 years as Prime Minister. And Sir Lyndon said, and I quote, "The cumulative experience of 25 years of independence has been of immense value to the Bahamians. However, it has given them a great insight into the working of government, and they may now have some fresh thoughts on how they would prefer to see their country run. Those thoughts may vary in their detail, but there seems to be a growing consensus on the need for a deeper and wider democracy and a more open and democratic system of government which better reflects the will of the people, enhances the freedom through greater equality and broader opportunity, establishes through appropriate checks and balances a fair and reasonable balance of power between executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government, and create a parliament which is strong and effective and can hold the government of the day that is responsible to it." Refine the quiet revolution. Now look at what he proposes, and then I will make some other recommendation for discussion. Sir Lyndon proposes that the monarchy should be abolished, and propose that the head of state should be a president who is born and lives in the Bahamas, and he or she should be elected for 7 years and play a more strategic role in the national life of our country. He goes on further and he says that we should extend the fundamental rights contained in our Constitution to include the right to vote. One could impair the right to vote in the Bahamas and it not be a constitutional matter, because it is not enshrined as a fundamental right in the Constitution, even though we cherish it very dearly. the right to the equal exercise of political choice, the right to a passport, the right to good health and clean in the Bill of Rights of our Constitution. He goes further with respect to citizenship. And he says citizenship for the 21st century Bahamas should ensure that children born outside the Bahamas to Bahamian mothers and foreign fathers should become citizens on the same terms as Bahamian men married to foreigners having children outside. And he also goes further that we as a Commonwealth should do everything that is reasonably practical to ensure that there is no statelessness within our Commonwealth. He goes on further and he looks at Parliament. And he says that Parliament should ensure that the principles of majority rule and gender equality mean that the membership of the House of Assembly and the Senate reflect as nearly as reasonably practical through a system of proportional representation. And what he was talking about is that in the Bahamas today, we have well over 50% of our population comprising women. But when you look at the House of Assembly, and when you look at our cabinet, it has no correlation. It has no correlation to the population. If you look at different political opinions, and we see that the composition of both the House and the cabinet may not reflect the true political choices that Bahamians make. So Lyndon goes on and he says that there should be a fixed date for elections. Why should we have to speculate when election will be called and engage in psychoanalysis of any individual? There should be a settled fixed date. This is a former Prime Minister. Then he goes on to say that there should be an independent electoral commission comprising 3 commissioners with security of tenure, so that we do not have before every general election constituencies with all kinds of configuration, which sometimes disturbs settled communities, right? Then he goes on to say that membership of members of the House of Assembly and the Senate to the executive should be limited. And he proposes a formula. He says there should be a limit of 35% of the members of the House of Assembly who can be appointed to the cabinet, and a limit of 25% of the membership of the Senate. Because how can the cabinet be accountable to the House of Assembly when most of the House of Assembly is in the cabinet? Yep. Then he goes on to say that accountability is very important. And he himself, having been a former Minister of Finance, he proposes that we should change the law and hold the Minister of Finance personally accountable. And this is what he says: personally responsible for public funds spent in breach of the legislative guidelines. Then he goes on and he says, our history, and this is very interesting, so I'm going to take this one very slow. He says, our history from 1492 has been characterized by a narrative of genocide, slavery, exploitation, segregation, and discrimination. And then he asked us the question, how do we want the 21st century Bahamas narrative? What shape, what content, and what form should it have? And then he challenges us with a very interesting recommendation. He says that the 21st century Bahamas, the narrative should be one of healing, reconciliation, and integration. And then he goes on with a very novel recommendation. He says that the flag that we all cherish, which symbolizes our nation's status and the concept of one people, he proposes that we change the flag. And this is what he says. He says we need a new flag for the new millennium. And the new flag should include a white triangle within the black triangle to reflect the incorporation of the white Bahamian population within this symbol that represents our nation state. In other words, this paper was presented in 1998. I was one of the people, along with Michael Stevenson, Renard Rigby, and Felix Bethel, that organized that seminar on the Constitution. And there has been no conversation within the Bahamas. So tonight I want to challenge us through the words of Celinda. But I want to go further. And I want to very quickly reflect on how we have organized our economy. Celinda focused on the infrastructure of our state, the Constitution, and the institutions of the state. But what about the economy? When our economy was shaped in the late 1950s, and the major architect of our economy, who is seldom credited, was Sir Stafford Sears. In the late 1950s, the Bahamas was essentially a subsistence farming, fishing, and seasonal tourism. It was Sir Stafford who led the initiative to expand the economy to year-round tourism and financial services. And one of the interesting things about our history is when Sir Stafford was doing that, he reached out to the PLP in 1962, in 1963, and he invited the chairman of the PLP, Henry Milton Taylor. And he said, look here, come travel with me and let us promote together this new model of economic development for the Bahama colony. So here you have the senior minister in the UBP government, the chairman of the official opposition, the PLP, traveling together, representing this new model of economic development. I don't think we have had any such bipartisan exercise since, right? But what the point that I wish to make is that the model of financial services and tourism has served us well. But just like we have been asked by Sir Lyndon to refine the political structure of our country, I would like to suggest that we must do the same for this economic model. And let me just make several observations about it. It is based on a number of assumptions. One of those assumptions is that economic development within the Bahamas can only occur through foreign direct investment. Now, when you, as an economist, when you look at other countries are organized on the principle that you develop a very robust national capital, and then it is supplemented by foreign direct investment, because it is the local we said it was too big to fail, but yet even a knighthood did not stop the change of ownership, and the hedge fund that was the financier acquiring the ownership of the enterprise. And similarly, well, we know, right? So it is, I would like to suggest that the public policy of the Bahamas, which is based on this assumption that foreign direct investment is the critical engine, ought to be, and we see it's reflected in the incentives, and we call it incentives, but what it is subsidization for foreign direct investment. We give subsidization to Atlantis. $5 million every year is contained in the budget of the Ministry of Tourism. We call it a cash contribution for promotion. But there is no Bahamian business that we provide proportionately any type of such subsidization. In other words, an incentive is to get you here. Once you're here, and you are running a profitable enterprise, then that incentive should be targeted to somebody else to expand the market. But what we do is we subsidize foreign direct investment. One of the interesting things that is happening right before our eyes, and there's hardly any public conversation, is the fastest growing sector of the tourism market isn't the overnight visitor to the hotels or even the cruise arrivals. On our family islands, we have allowed persons to come into the Bahamas, use the national exemptions for family islands, build second homes. Now they're called second homes, but they are hotels. They are second homes that are marketed outside of the Bahamas. They do not pay any business license tax. They do not pay any hotel room tax. And their employees are seasonal or part-time. So in many instances, they do not pay any NIB. And as I have traveled the family islands, and I speak to Bahamians who own hotels and motels on the family islands, they cannot get their hotels in that B&B network. So the marketing of these second and third homes are not regulated in the Bahamas, and they operate as international businesses within the Bahamas, competing with Bahamians. So what we see then is we see a model of economic development. We have banks in the Bahamas, but we have no merchant bank. If you go to Jamaica, if you go to other Caribbean countries, in addition to the commercial banks, you have merchant banks. Banks which specialize in providing venture capital to entrepreneurs. In the Bahamas, it is easier to get a consumer loan, and you can borrow more money to buy a car or buy a house than you can borrow to fund an enterprise. So what I would like to propose is that as we refine this quiet revolution, in addition to looking at the political institutions of our state, that we need to really look at the assumptions of the economic model that has served us well, but in my humble submission has reached a point of diminishing return, and that we have to better incentivize Bahamian entrepreneurship, Bahamian ownership, Bahamian joint venture with foreign direct investors in order to ensure a more sustainable, and of course, the commitment that we made in 1953, we must pay more attention to our family islands, and we must also provide a much more great incentive in the areas of cultural development, because it is in the area of culture that you will have a higher level of Bahamian ownership, because we're talking about the Bahamian imagination, the Bahamian talent, and most people in the world travel for culture. So thank you very much.
Mr. Sears is going to take a few questions, so please be upstanding when you ask your question, please.
I'm fine, thank you, sir.
Just a comment, certain people back so far outside of the nation. And if you have been in office for 25 years, you don't see the vision that is changing while you were in office. That's a very interesting concept. As a Bahamian, but I also went from a phase where the gentleman was foreign, and I can say that I have argued with all my governments. I went through the UU, the PLD, and the NSF. I'm just going to do so. The government think that who's definitely foreign and who's local. It's going to be the same topic of all the skills.
And this is why it's a conversation for all of us, irrespective of political parties. And that is to examine as rationally and as objectively as we can the assumptions underlying how we do business and how we utilize the resources of the state, the crown land, the incentives, which really are tax dollars, which we are exercising. Incentives mean money that ought to come, but we are allowing a particular investor or class of investors as an incentive. So I think the question that you have written, the observation and the sharing of your experience demonstrates that this is a national question. And I believe that we have a fantastic opportunity for new people to engage the political process and bring fresh ideas, vision, and a clear understanding of the strategic, or what I call the niche opportunities in the global marketplace for a country. And we're quite extraordinary, and I don't like always to talk about behaving exceptionality, but I don't know of another country of this size with 30 airports that must be maintained, half of which are international airports which must be FAA compliant. But yet, we are reluctant to introduce an equitable system of income tax so that we can maintain the infrastructure. And therefore, as you move throughout the country, you see that we are challenged with maintenance. A great country, but challenged with maintenance. And therefore, we're not asking, I believe, the more fundamental questions to answer your life experience. Because you said, under various governments, as a Bahamian entrepreneur, you are faced with a certain reality. Well then, it means that we must begin to question the assumptions under which we operate and organize our economy.
Said all of that. Nobody else will ask the question I asked.
Yes, sir.
Having said all of that, single tax is never an option for us. Because it only, again, favors the favorite. And I always felt that as a behavior, we would never ever be encouraged to, well, if you want to be an entrepreneur, do it at your own risk. But while income tax would be the most, and everybody said that, it would be best for all concerned. Because everybody earns an income. You pay on that. But we don't decide to do that because some pay goes to the wrong folks. Could you imagine what the community would pay on their income? Yeah. Could you imagine what the most insults when you as a business person receive a check that bounces? Yet still, in every Canadian bank or every bank, or offshore banks, it is illegal to issue a check if you don't know the cover. So having said all that, you think we change that? No, we don't change that. We still issue a check that bounces. All are carrying banks to the baby banks. And there's still, the government never told me to change that. Simple things like that. I'm going to comment, sir. I'm going to confirm that.
If you listen. If you listen.
Good evening. While your attempts at sensitizing us, and I would say the public at large, to your ploy is admirable. The party that you are still affiliated with, in theory, in principle, is contrary to what you're trying to introduce. We are aware of what happened recently in yourself challenging your leader and your advert. Based on the results, based on some of the ideologies and the things that were allowed to happen during the process, how do you see yourself making a change in the environment where there are so many persons opposing progress in a transparent way? It appears as though you're the lone voice in that entity, crying for the progress that most business persons and citizens at large are seeking. But as the loner, it appears that your voice will be quieted over a short period of time, especially if the party regains governance. I have to chuckle because, I'm a small businessman in this society where it seems as though we are tactfully trying to disseminate small and medium business persons. So what's the next step? Where do we go? How do we agitate? How do you agitate, given the environment that you're in right now?
That is an excellent question. When ideas, philosophy, bring different people together from different backgrounds, as it did in the PLP, Cecil Wallace Whitfield, Arthur Phillips, and Henry Milton Taylor, Paul Hadley, and Doris Johnson, and Eugenia Lockhart. Just different people, different background. The challenge in any organization is when you have a competition of tactics, priority. You're faced with several options. One, if I engage in a competition within the organization and I lose, do I pick my marbles up and go? Or do I say that this organization belongs to me and to all of the people here? And this is where I think you have to understand the history. Because when they started in 53, the odds were so overwhelming. The people with the money, the power, and the influence seemed like Goliath. But it was this understanding of a vision, the correctness of the vision, which even attracted ministers like H.W. Brown and Bonaventure D. In other words, what I'm saying is that I am prepared to fight for the vision as I understand it, and that attracted me to this organization. And as I have traveled throughout this archipelago to about 10 islands and gone into the homes of people who sacrificed their entire lives, I know that the organization does not belong to any one person or small group of persons. And that sometimes you have to be able to stand, even if it means that you will stand alone. Because even if they kill me, there are thousands who come in after me, and they believe in this vision. And this is why I have always tried not to personalize this, because it's bigger than any one individual. And people will say, well, you sacrificing this, but I could not stand here and speak to you tonight if people didn't sacrifice for me and us. So, yes, sometimes it's imperfect, but I choose to work within an organization. And the complaints I have, I will raise them in the organization. But trust me, I am not prepared to be anybody's boy. Okay? I stand in a party with colleagues, and I have a right, as every member has a right, to articulate their point of view, to increase and improve the general good of the organization and ultimately the general good of the country. And that is what I am doing to the best of my ability. And I am supremely confident that the ideas that I and others have been advocating are not ideas for my own self-aggrandizement. These are ideas which will make it easier for my children and those who come after me. Hopefully it'll be easier for us who are alive, right? But I think that every generation, and this is why I began by saying this is a fantastic opportunity for Bahamians to engage in the process. We cannot allow ourselves to become spectators. This time is too critical because I see this time as the time when Stafford Sands was trying to conceive or reconceive of the economy as it existed then. And sometimes, just like he did, and reach over to the PLP, we have to be able to get out of our blinders and begin to form alliances based on the core values that will take us to the next level. And I believe that the philosophy, which the core values espoused in 1953 remain relevant. And I am part of a democratic organization. And according to its constitution, there will be other opportunities. My commitment is to advocate the ideas within the context of the organization, and that is so when you join Rotary. You may have a different point of view than the incumbent leadership, but you advocate based on your understanding of those core values of the Rotary Code. And I am doing the same thing. And I appreciate that sometimes we you know, this is why I go back to history. Didn't Perry Christie, the Prime Minister, and the former Prime Minister Hubert Ingram in 1984 stand? And didn't the Bahamian people rewarded both of them? Shouldn't that tell us that when you stand for right, how could you lose? It may seem overwhelming in the moment, but I believe that we all we have so many wonderful experiences of people who within our families and people in our communities who have stood up on all of our islands. And I believe that all of us can bring our collective wisdom, because we live in the Bahamas. We've just had a testimony. You've also given a testimony as an entrepreneur. The question is, do we allow it to persist and complain, or do we use the best of our wisdom to see how we can shift this and make it much more inspiring for younger people who are opting to leave? Those who have the opportunity to study abroad, many are not coming back. It's the first time in my lifetime, because when I went off to school, you had to really cajole people to stay and do a master's or continue, because they couldn't wait to come back. So I believe that this is a fantastic opportunity for us to engage the political process and to push it beyond the assumptions that have served us well, but I believe have reached a point of diminishing return. Yes,
So my like is kind of similar to what you just mentioned. some things aside for the talk over a second. Because I'm young at the moment and I'm still pursuing my master's, and I'm not the only person in this field. And I have several observations that I made. One was related to progressive reporting, which I'm seeing a lot of similarities right now between that reporting and the 2016 election that we're going to write with the DNC and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, where the party already made its decision. The party leadership made a decision long ago who would be the nominee to be president of the United States. You know, so how that totally didn't have to be right. And I saw what I similarities between that and the current iteration of the progressive reporting. Also, it showed that there's a lot of power basically concentrated on one person or one specific group of the rest of the report. And I also see a lot of similarities between that and our country report, where essentially the Prime Minister is constitutional law. This is decides when our elections are, or even if the legislature in the cabinet, who's in the Senate, he appoints the President of the Governor General, the other powers of the Governor General. The Prime Minister is essentially, for lack of a better term, in many ways a constitutional dictator. He has that right. And you can, and he does not get right now. He or she sees that. With that being said, what drives you and motivates you, and how do you plan on necessarily planning to reform this? How do you reform a system of governance that we have in a country that is based on basic citizenship? And that also makes me wonder about the statements made by Sears. He was one of the men who brought sitting down when this constitution was written, and various aspects of the EOP's constitution never made it to our constitution, such as freedom of press and the rights of women, and etc. So, how do you plan in the position you're right now to activate and educate myself and inspire my children that we cannot change the country that seems to be the same of the sex of life?
In fact, this is a wonderful opportunity because it is the millennials that this conversation is really directed. Because I think that there is a perception that because we have achieved majority rule and independence, somehow the struggle is over. And just like people in the United States who thought the civil rights movement was over, and you've seen the rollback of so many gains that had been made to affirm diversity and inclusion and equal opportunity, is that the building of a nation state is an ongoing process. It is a process that has to be fueled by the evolving expectation of new generations. Because what you have indicated, I agree with. The constitutional structure that we have, it means that a new generation has to carry that struggle. Now, I am going to carry it as long as I have life and health and so on, but it is dependent upon you. Rather than hedge your bet, because if you go to Canada, if you go to the United States, you still will have to be engaged. Wherever you are, it will, the nature of being an engaged citizen, permanent resident, is that you must participate. And this is our construct. People died, people sacrificed for us. And we have to learn how to treasure it, but also how to improve it. It's something that has been given to us, but it is not perfect. It has fantastic attributes, but it must be improved. And certainly, one of the things that we have to constantly work on is the legacy. The legacy of our colonial past is so much reflected in the institutions that still exist and still manage and govern our affairs. So, building a nation And we talk about this in the Constitution. We say the Constitution is a living document. I mean, take for example the United States. When the United States Constitution was formed, African American people were still slaves. And the Constitution made allowance and said that you were not a full human being. But we see that that society has been constantly working to improve its democracy. It has amended its Constitution 21 times. And the 14th Amendment, Bahamians take advantage of that all the time, because it was to remove the legacy of slavery that the 14th Amendment said any person born in the United States must enjoy all of the privileges, immunities of a citizen. But didn't the most famous Bahamian, who just happened to have been born there, because his parents as farmers in Cat Island took their tomato crop to Miami, and he was born there, right?
Yeah.
And you have many Bahamians today who go and have their children in the United States, right? I mean, so what I'm saying is that we see different societies grappling with their imperfection. And the nature of our citizenship, it has to be like Jacob, that grabbed that angel and say, I ain't gonna let you go, I gotta wrestle with you until you bless me. I think that the nature of citizenship requires that we probe, we question, and we challenge. And we also bring the best of our judgment, our ideas, and our vision. So, you are the young cylinder. Look how young they were when they started. You're the young Cecil. I mean, when they were in the cabinet, they were in their 30s and building a nation. So you have the same genes and the same capacity, and you've had a wider life experience than many of them would have had. So why can't you have the same courage to engage this society and challenge it to be better? I mean, that is what this citizenship is all about. And we cannot allow, you see, we have to be able to speak truth to power. We cannot allow ourselves to be intimidated, because this is why I started with the core values. It says our party committed itself to being a servant leader. In other words, to say that as leaders, we are the servants, not we are the masters, and you must cower in the face of your servants. And this is, for many people, this may be a revolutionary concept, but this is what the nature of our citizenship, as well as the core values that this party, of which I am a member, made in 1953. So I encourage you to engage. And sometimes being a dissident, you know, someone may say, I'm a dissident in my, but you know, being a dissident and questioning and challenging, I mean, I see that as really the model of citizenship, not simply saying what you think someone may want you to say. So I encourage you. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. You see how we could be better, and bring your recommendations and your suggestions. So I think it's a fantastic period for all of us to engage, to challenge, and to present an alternative vision. And this is what I'm doing within my party. And it is my hope that it will be reflected in the party's platform.
Thank you, Mr. Sears. PDG Boschman. so far as you were the first, like you did the last, to say thanks to our guest speaker, please.
Go down and pass it around.
No second speech. Too much.
You sure you want to do that, Brad? You sure? You sure that's the best choice? Yeah.
When we started, we said, is it fair to walk in circle?
Exactly.
I only asked one question. He is as old as I am, or older, but thank you very much. Mr. Sears? Mr. Sears? He wasn't a QC when I met him. He's a QC now. In case you do not know, he can represent us in the Queen, whatever that means, the Queen's Consul. Thank you very much for a very political overview of what's going on in our country, which some of us younger people agree or disagree with. But thank you nevertheless. It will be very interesting come the next election to see where we go. So, Mr. Sears, having lost, you're challenged. I am what I am, but he's a politician. We get all the time, okay? I didn't say the word, okay? But this, I didn't ask to go over here, but I'll cut it short. Mrs. Sears, he's older than you. He's not your boy. He's a possible Prime Minister of Canada. Back on point again, please. Mrs. Sears, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you sometime in the near future in whatever capacity you fill in. But in this capacity, thank you very much. I'd like to present you with a mentor from a cocktail glass to give a toast, and a card I won't read because it's addressed to you. Thank you very much.